You're listening to the Beyond Nurse Residency Podcast, an educational series where we interview experts on all topics related to the transition of new graduate nurses into practice and beyond. I'm your host, Nicole Weathers, Director of the Iowa Online Nurse Residency Program. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump in. As we wrap up the year, I wanted to take a moment to reflect not just on the work we've done, but on the conversations we've had throughout this Beyond Nurse Residency podcast. This podcast has brought together voices from across the country, leaders, educators, and innovators, all committed to improving the transition to practice for new graduate nurses and supporting nurses in the practice setting. But today, I'm turning the mic towards people who make this program possible, our team. They've been behind the scenes of every episode, every pilot, every challenge, and every success that we've had. We've talked about what we've learned, who inspired us, and what advice we'd give to nurse residency coordinators and hospital leaders navigating the complexities of workforce development. Whether you've listened to every episode or just joining us, I hope this conversation gives you insight, encouragement, and a few ideas to carry into the new year. So today I have with me our guest, IONRP, or the Iowa Online Nurse Residency team. So I've got Jess Ociepka, Amanda Bruscher, and Jill Gillespie. So why don't you each take a quick minute and just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
I can start. I'm Jess, and I am one of the program coordinators with the Iowa Online Nurse Residency Program. I've been a nurse for 18 years now, and it is something that I still love to do every single day. I grew up in Maine, and I've spent the last 11 years in Colorado. I continue to work clinically in a rural facility, and I also teach at our local community college. And a fun fact is I was an online site coordinator for the program before joining the IONRP team.
I can go next. So my name is Amanda Bruscher, and I am also a program coordinator with the IONRP. And I have been a nurse for about 9 years now, and it's crazy how fast it goes, but also kind of how short it feels at the same time. And I have experience working at both large and small facilities, and I still work clinically at an infusion center, which I really enjoy being able to still connect with patients, but I really enjoyed my role in the nurse residency program. And similar to Jess, I do help with CNA classes at a local college to me, and I live in a small town in Northwest Iowa. And I guess a fun fact I'll share since Jess shared hers, I was actually a resident in the IONRP program quite a few years ago. So it's fun to kind of relate to the residents in that way and some challenges they face. I think I can help them through that a little bit more, having been through it myself.
And last but not least, this is Jill Gillespie. I'm the marketing coordinator for the IONRP, and I've been in this role for 6 years where I lead branding, marketing, and social media strategy. I also contribute to our curriculum design for our residency program and our other course offerings. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from the University of Iowa and an Associate of Arts in Graphic Design. What excites me most about my work is the opportunity to design and learn new skills, whether it's learning web design or exploring podcast editing. I love the challenge of bringing fresh ideas to life and finding new ways to connect with our audience. Outside of work, I live in North Liberty, so I am the closest to the college. I live with my husband, my 2 teenage sons, and my crazy border collies. And I'm grateful to be part of a program that supports nurses as they grow in their professional journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jess and Amanda and Jill, for being with us today as we sort of take some time to reflect on this past year in the program, the things that we've learned, the conversations that we've had. So I think the first question I would love to explore with you guys is about just that, right? What's one thing maybe you've picked up personally through either our work or through a podcast conversation that's really began to kind of shift the way that you think? Anything that stuck out or any new ideas that were sparked that you'd like to share?
I think for me, the episode with Dr. Judy Duscher discussing the transition cycle and the emotional journey that new graduates have was a conversation that has really stuck with me. I think we see this cycle in our nurse residents, and we've probably even felt it in ourselves. The frame that she used with those pivotal self-reflection questions. The first is, can I do this? That the new graduates experience around that shock phase. And later, the do I want to do this around the 6 months. I think that offers such a clear lens, and understanding the disengagement or the uncertainty we often observe in our nurse residents around that time, and understanding that it's not burnout, it's not disinterest, but it's that developmental milestone in their professional identity formation. So when Dr. Judy described this, it was sort of this aha moment for me. I think I feel better prepared to have those conversations with new graduates, and I feel better prepared to support them during this time.
I mean, I really think that reinforcing the importance of that theoretical framework and guiding what we do, that there is a method to the madness, that there is actual research that underpins the experience for the new graduate nurse, and then the interventions we're laying on top of that in this program. I personally felt that conversation was just one of my favorites, I think, from the year, and was such a great way, I think, to kick off the season and the episodes of the podcast. I've gotten so many comments from people over the year about that episode in particular, and how there were a lot of things, and just like you, Jess, that I hadn't really thought about it this way, or maybe when I read her research, I wasn't interpreting it maybe the way that she explained it. So actually having the opportunity to have her explain that research was just so amazing.
I was going to share something that I personally learned this year, and it kind of relates to that talk about the transition cycle, and then also the podcast we had with someone talking about well-being. It just made me reflect on this last year with residents, and I had a few that were just it seemed a little more challenging, but when I really took the time to check in with them and they started to open up, they had a lot of things going on in their personal lives, and it was just a good reminder to me too, as leaders, we need to remember they are a whole person. And I think we try to do our best throughout the program to talk about work-life balance, and you try to keep life separate from work, but it does all tie together. And I think as leaders, it's important to maybe recognize some of those signs and check in a little more frequently, ask how are things going at home. And I had one resident just share that she was really thankful for how I supported her professionally, but also personally as well. And that it meant a lot to me that she noticed that, and especially in the virtual setting. And I feel like Jess and I, we try our best to do that, but it is more difficult. So it was really cool to hear that from the resident. So I think whether you're virtual or you're in person with those residents, just being really intentional with checking in on them and how they're doing as a whole too.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think back to this year and the things that I've learned, there's so many things that keep coming up. And I think so many common themes throughout the podcast episodes. And not just that pertain to new graduate nurses and what we're doing in this program, but pertain to me as a human and an individual as well. So, that well-being episode with Dr. Corey Church was kind of hit at a really important time for me personally after, graduating the DNP program, finding out that we were awarded the Edge Runner by the American Academy of Nursing, and just reminding me the importance of kind of slowing down, taking that time that you need. I mean, nurses are, and based on the introductions that we had, nurses are wired to be productive workhorses, right? We are trained to solve problems. We want to move quickly. We want to get things done. There's a lot of nurses that probably don't just have one job, right? They have 2 and 3 and 4 jobs that they're doing. And it's just something about who we are. And so I think kind of some of these reminders about, that underlying experience, and then just the importance of kind of caring for the caregiver or caring for yourself and that personal well-being. I think that these conversations have really helped me personally and professionally, as well as kind of shape what we're doing with our new graduates.
One of our residents recently shared an app, and it's called I Am. And it gives you positive affirmations sort of throughout the day, which at first I wasn't quite sure about, but I did download it. And while you were chatting, Nicole, I got today's positive affirmation, and I know it's okay if I don't figure out everything today. And I felt like it just went along so nicely with what you were just saying, that it's okay. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to do all the things.
Well, and I think taking the time to really slow down and recognize how far you've came, whether you're a new graduate nurse or you're a leader of a hospital or you're leading a residency program. I mean, we just got back a couple weeks ago from the American Academy of Nursing where we were recognized as an edge runner. And you know, it was one of those things on my to-do list that, you know, we had to go out to Washington, D.C., get this award. Yes, it was exciting, but I think being able to take a few days and really just soak that all in, I think is really impactful for a number of reasons.
I think what stood out to me was, well, first of all, the staggering statistic that 91% of new nurses have reported burnout since the pandemic. And I think it reframed everything I viewed about our program, because I was like, I think people thought COVID happened. We've come out of it, but there's still an issue there. So I don't think COVID was the issue. I think it just highlighted the issue. And so
100%.
We're like, oh, this is a thing that's always there. And I love when we kind of talked about it from a generational standpoint, Generation Z. So that, I mean, I'm the oldest in our group. I'm Gen X. And to hear the Gen Z and just learn about, oh my gosh, and how different it is for them. And like you said, I mean, we take on so much more and we utilize our 24 hours so much different than we did 20 years ago. I can't imagine coming into healthcare and feeling that way at such a young age. So he just had really good points. He was fun to listen to. And it just really hit me like, wow, this is important work that we're doing.
There's so much, I think, around this COVID, you know, the impetus of COVID, we say that all the time, but yet so much of this was happening before. And actually, when you look at workforce things, I did a presentation few years back. And I found this workforce study that was done, I don't know if it was like in the 40s or 50s, about why we had a nursing shortage. And it came down to a lot of the same reasons why we have a nursing shortage today. Like, as much as there's been so much change, so much remains the same. And I think from a generational standpoint, these newer generations are just speaking up about it. I think historically there's been the mentality of like, it's just the way it is. And so we just have to deal with it. And they're saying we're not going to deal with it. And so I think generationally we can learn a lot from that as far as, you know, slowing down, taking the time to recognize what we're doing. Again, just highlights the importance of rest and focusing on our own personal well-being so we can continue to show up and do that work that we need to do as a nurse.
That just reminded me of a conversation I just had, I think yesterday, with a resident during a check-in. And she was, I always just ask, like, how are things going personally, professionally? And she was sharing that a couple months ago, she was feeling very burnt out. She was like, I feel like I live at work. I feel like I don't enjoy going to work because I'm always there. So I can't even enjoy going there because it feels like I'm always there. And so she shared that she talked with her leaders on site and they cut back her hours just a little bit. And she also, I love what she said. She took some time to like reflect and she's like, I love my job and I love what I do, but I just don't enjoy going there right now. So she's like, I know it's not necessarily the place or the unit, but it's just something else is going on. So I told her, I was like, I'm so proud of you for taking that time to reflect, because I feel like a lot of times people will get burnt out and they're like, oh, well, it's got to be better somewhere else. So I'm just going to quit and I'm going to go somewhere. And then they find that they're having the same issues. So I just really thought that was neat that she took the time, and she's like, yeah, and it reminded me of that transition cycle that you talk about at the beginning of the program. And I was like, yep, that's why we talk about it, just so you know that it is coming at some point. So
we've already kind of jumped into this when we started talking about some of the great guests that we've had on the podcast, but do you guys have a favorite episode from this season? Any like things that stood out to you in particular? So maybe a quote or an insight that was shared by one of them.
I really enjoyed all of the podcasts and all of the guests this year. So I think this is a really tough question. To me, one of the more memorable episodes was actually on innovation and how nurses are transforming healthcare through creativity and leadership. Allie and Molly, who are the guests for that episode, shared a powerful reminder that nurses really are the last set of eyes, hands, and brains before anything reaches the patient, whether that's a product, a policy, a medication. Really, everything passes through the nurse's hands last. And they also emphasize how nurses are working across multiple teams, whether it's physicians, therapies, consulting teams, and often innovate what's available to meet the patient's needs. And I think that perspective really resonated with me being a nurse for so long, because we have been innovating for a long time, but I think we just always don't give ourselves credit for it. And in our residency program this past year, we introduced an innovation exercise, and we're working to build that concept into our curriculum for new graduates. So I'm excited to see how that continues to grow and shape the way our new graduate nurses are approaching patient care.
I mean, innovation, I think, is like when we start thinking about the future, this is going to be a huge piece of it. I think historically, we've always been innovators. You go back all the way to like Florence Nightingale, right? And we could say it started with Florence. But if we're going to, again, keep up with the pace of change and the demands that are getting placed on these nurses, innovation is going to be a huge piece of that. So building that into our curriculum, empowering nurses to view their work as innovation, and giving them the tools to do something with those ideas, I think is going to be huge.
I am similar to Jess in that I enjoyed basically all the episodes this year. I think there's just so many takeaways, but one that I really enjoyed was actually the most recent one from October about belonging and inclusion in the workplace. And I really enjoyed the conversation of the difference between fitting in versus belonging. I never really taken the time to think about the difference of that. Honestly, I don't know if I really thought there was a difference. So it was really good to hear them talk about that. And I just love how they emphasize the importance of being able to show up as you are, not changing yourself to fit in. And I think I related so closely with it because when I started as a new nurse, I was in a large facility and it felt very cliquey. Like all the units were kind of in their own clique. And if you went to a different floor, they kind of looked at you like, who's this new girl? What are you doing here? And it wasn't like, oh, we're so happy to have you here, or what unit do you work on? It didn't feel like you were very welcomed. So I think I relate to that because I had that feeling of like, oh, what do I need to do to fit in here? Like, do I need to go and get further education or get new skills, or I don't know what I needed to do. But I think that conversation too is really important to have with new grads because I think too, there's so many different generations going into nursing, and they touched on that in the podcast too. And I think they talked a little bit about using the term like baby nurses and trying to avoid that because we have a lot of older nurses going into nursing for the first time, but like they said, whether you're 50 or 20, you have lived life, you have experiences, and you're not a baby. You have experiences that you can bring to the table and share different insights. So I really loved that reminder too.
I agree. It's hard to pick my favorite episode. And I feel like I've said this before, but every season there's such a thread that gets woven through each one and they kind of connect. So obviously, I really like the well-being one, but I also really liked the first episode with Judy Dukeshire. I felt like she just explained everything so well, and it actually helped me understand what we're doing. So it helped me to up my game as far as marketing our program. It just really connected everything in my head. And I know, Nicole, you kind of touched on that, but I definitely, and I think her episode was the most listened to as well. So that's for sure one that people need to listen to no matter what.
There are a lot of threads, I think, that kind of tie these episodes together. And that was never intentional. I think when we start identifying guests and who we want to have on the podcast, there is a little bit of rhyme and reason, but also not really a rhyme or reason. And as I was kind of thinking about and reflecting on this podcast to record this episode, I came across a quote about, if we want to build systems that last, we have to care for the people who hold them up. And that is really what each of these podcast episodes serves to remind us, right? Is that it's about kind of caring for the caregiver. What are we doing? So whether it's understanding that theoretical framework, whether it's helping to intentionally build professional identity in our nurses, giving them the tools that they need to impact the work that they are doing, that idea of agency over my work. So we talked about innovation, we talked about evidence-based practice, we talked about just caring, that well-being piece that we've brought up already. But then also we dove into talking about preceptor development, and then also caring for the people who care for the nurses or who help them throughout this transition experience. And so there were just some really important things, I think, also shared by Dr. Beth Ulrich about preceptor development. And, one of the greatest things that we can do, one of our biggest contributions to nursing, is really helping that next generation kind of come along up into the profession. And I think we couldn't do that if we didn't have that foundational knowledge, foundational experience, if we didn't have people caring for us. And so this healthcare system is all about the people who are part of it. And so I think, one of the sort of big takeaways or big sort of threads throughout this season of the podcast, everything that we do in this program is about just that, right? Making sure that we're getting the tools, the resources, the support to the people who need it so that they can provide that exceptional patient care. So many of our listeners are nurse residency coordinators, hospital leaders. Maybe we could share some practical advice that they could take into the new year. Any ideas, small changes that you think could have big impact, or that you think maybe organizations could really look into adopting as maybe they formulate their own goals for the new year?
I feel like this is a good, coming off of what you just said, Nicole. Our episode, two of my favorite episodes is Nurses Week and then Nursing Professional Development Week. And so I think it's really important for our coordinators and our leaders to listen to those because they get such great feedback from people using our program. And I know it's more than maybe not even about our program, but just what they're doing in their facilities to make nurse residency work. And the Nursing Professional Development Week, Brian Baydoun from Unity Point Health Trinity, I thought that was a great listen. And it kind of touches on what you were just saying. I think preceptors and educators are so important right now, but we've lost a lot of preceptors, a lot of nurses that have been in the field for 40 years are retiring, and there's a lack of preceptors. So they're taking a lot of these newer residents that are maybe 2 to 3 years in, and they're having to precept. And Brian talked about that. He's like, I'm not like this nurse with 20 years experience, and then he self-admitted that he was a residency dropout. And he's like, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, you're going to be the nurse educator. And he was like, well, then I'm going to make it how I would have liked it and what would have kept me in it. So I thought that was really interesting that we realized, maybe that's not a bad thing that some of these preceptors are only 2-3 years in because they remember how it felt. And they're like, God, I wish someone had my back. I'm going to have their back. And so we're kind of saying, hey, this is a new way of dealing with, new grads, new nurses. So I just think that really was a great episode. It's really fun to listen to, and I think it would be a great intro for any of our coordinators.
I mean, because that time has changed, right? And so we can continue to just talk about how we've lost this experience, or we can begin to think about it differently. And how can we, instead of seeing that as a challenge, how can we leverage that as a really important sort of possibility of how could this actually help us instead of hinder us? I don't know if that makes sense, but I like where you're going with that, Jill.
Using innovation. I also really like that Dr. Beth Ulrich, when she talked about the value of precepting, that idea of not everybody can or should be a preceptor. I think that's a really powerful thing to keep in mind. So maybe that nurse with 40 years of experience, even though they're a very experienced nurse, isn't the best person to be that preceptor.
Well, I think going along with that, if we're talking about tips or advice, practical advice for leaders, the importance of preceptor development. So, I know we've talked about this. We have a course that we have available because we've seen the impact of that in the success of residency programs. But even throughout this year, we've been working on a research study around the challenges with transition to practice with Dr. Mary Harper at the Association for Nursing Professional Development, and preliminary data, looking at the data. We haven't published anything yet, but one of the things that rose to the top was about the importance of the preceptor piece. And so that was so interesting that yes, anecdotally, we've seen that. We've got Dr. Ulrich that's talking about that, but also in the most recent study around the challenges with getting a transition to practice implemented, that's also one of the top things that are a challenge for residency coordinators. So I know that initially we think residency is separate, but preceptors are kind of what hold up residency and what help them translate it back to the practice setting.
I am going to add, it kind of relates to this conversation too, and kind of with what Jill said about sometimes those preceptors are only a couple years into their practice. So they're kind of like, oh, am I able to be a preceptor? And it reminded me of the podcast with Dr. Nelda Godfrey when she talked about that professional identity, and when she talked about nurse as a leader, reminding us that all nurses are leaders. So even if you are a new nurse, you're still a leader in an aspect. So maybe you're not in the preceptor role specifically, and maybe you're not quite ready for all the requirements that come with that, but still being aware of how you're showing up to work and how you're being professionally, because you never know who is watching you or who's learning from you. And I know personally, I've had, when I worked at a smaller facility, I remember working with a nurse that had worked there for many years, and she was getting close to retirement. And she just always told me, she's like, Amanda, I'm just always learning from you, and I just appreciate all you do to help me. And I felt the same way to her too. So, and here I was, at the time, I felt like a very new nurse, and I was like, oh, that's really cool that she's feeling like she's able to learn from me and me learn from her as well. So
I think that idea was also embedded when Dr. Lindell was speaking on professional identity and discussing the formation, when she mentioned the importance of leadership and that empowering our nurses. So the idea of leaders, recognizing that nurses, even new graduates, are leaders. They're human beings. They need to thrive. So how can we empower them? How can we respect them? How can we make sure they're heard? And I think it is interesting. That's sort of a common theme that's been woven through a lot of the different podcasts and the podcast guests.
And Dr. Joseph talked too about sort of culture and how culture can kind of drive professional identity. And so we think about this in terms of inside our healthcare organization walls and how that culture impacts that. But then also she briefly got into kind of talking about outside of the hospital, right? Or outside of the healthcare organization, and what's happening on social media, and how nurses are portraying themselves on social media, and how they're, we talk about professional identity, values, knowledge, nurses leader, and then our professional presence. And I think one thing as we move forward too, and as we think about how we support people in the future, is going to be about even our professional presence online. We talk to our kids about this, that be careful what you post online, and, maybe it following you into adulthood. But I think even as adults, the comments that are made, the things that we post about nursing, about healthcare, that all is a part of that professional identity piece too. And I think there's going to be so much to come around social media presence, because that impacts the profession of nursing and the professional brand of nursing, and how society views nurses is based on what we're posting online. And so that's going to be, I think, a very important conversation too, as we move forward. So since we're talking about moving forward and what's going to be important moving forward, what do you guys think? What are you excited about? What do you hope we explore next? Is there a specific topic you'd like us to see covered? Is there a specific dream guest maybe you'd like us to have on?
I think the world is trending in this AI field, and I would love to hear more about that. I'm not sure what that would look like or how that conversation would go, but it'd be really interesting to see how AI is influencing healthcare. Clinically, for MPD specialists, I would just be really curious to hear a little bit more. I was going to say, maybe it's the educator in me, but I also think hearing more, providing more information about perhaps advancing educational opportunities, whether that's specialized nursing roles, ongoing education for nurses, I think that would always be a great topic to explore too.
Yeah, I think the AI or even just like informatics, just the technology piece and how we're leveraging technology and how new nurses are leveraging technology. And I think when we think about, I was just having a conversation actually with someone last week about this. I've noticed it with my own kids. Like they're working on a math problem and they're like, oh, I got to check that to make sure it's right. And so they'll feed it into ChatGPT and ChatGPT will tell them if they did it right or not. And at what point do they trust that they know they have the knowledge to make that decision themselves? And so that's one thing that I think would be really interesting to explore kind of at the intercept of new nurses too, is if they're using these tools in their first year of nursing to provide better patient care, great. But at what point do they know to trust that intuition versus rely on artificial intelligence to tell them what to do next? And so it's going to be an important conversation. I would love to have a guest come on and talk about that because it's here, it's now, we're using it. But also, I think we need to, there's more to that conversation that needs to be had for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to share, I agree that conversation around AI, and I think how can we maybe have that conversation with our nurse residents too, because I'm sure they're going to continue to have maybe more questions come up around that. So I think it'd be great to educate ourselves a little bit more in that world as well. And I think too, I know every season we have someone talk about well-being, and I really like the belonging one, but I think too, just continuing to have at least one guest maybe that will continue to talk about that, because I feel like well-being is always going to be an ongoing thing for nurses and healthcare providers, and no matter what role you're in. And I think it's just a good reminder. I think we all kind of shared that we all always love that episode, and it's a good reminder for all of us too. So I think just having a guest in that space again would be really beneficial too.
Going back to your thought on AI, not only having conversations with the new grad about how it's being used and leveraged for patient care, but how do we begin to have those conversations with our patients? I don't envy providers who are up against I asked ChatGPT and this is what they said it was. I don't need to be on that medication because I'm only at this level, and ChatGPT told me that, medications aren't supposed to be started till here. I'm so glad at this point that I'm not a provider needing to deal with that. But I think as we support nurses that are out there taking care of patients, we need to equip them with the skills to have those types of conversations as well. And I agree, Amanda, well-being is always an important topic. And I think something that we continually, it's a work in progress, right? And so having somebody come on and talk about that each year is definitely a great idea.
Yeah, that just made me think too of with patients, we always tell them not to Google their symptoms, but now I feel like it's going to amplify a lot with ChatGPT because it's so quick and it's just like your answer is right there. And it is a little scary to think about, like, what are patients going to do or nurses, and yeah, I think just having further conversation around that is really important.
For the last several years, my mom calls me and says, Dr. Google told me. So now it will just be Dr. ChatGPT told me. So I agree. I don't envy those providers either.
Well, I mean, it's so much quicker, right? It's so much quicker to go there than it is to try to get into this provider. And so I think another thing that's going to be coming up is, even more use of things like telehealth and how do we get quick access to these providers? We're going to have to see some innovation, I think, in that area if we're going to compete with ChatGPT or, any sort of artificial intelligence like that, that'll be coming up and be out there.
I love promoting our facilities. So I would love to have one of our facilities on and talk about our academy, which has been doing so amazing. And for people that don't know, our academy is really a precursor to a facility using our residency program. So they get to work with us one-on-one and kind of figure out what their needs are. And kind of tailoring the program to what they need at their facility. And a lot of them have one educator. Some of them don't even have an educator. So kind of walking them through it and being a support for the educators and the site coordinators, I think is huge. Again, just kind of talking about support at every level. It's, been something we've kind of just started in the last 2 years. And so we're finally like going through the process of working through the academy and then having them have residents go through the residency, and now they're completing. So we're finally to that stage where I think we really need to talk about it.
I think it would be great to maybe have somebody come on and share a little bit about the experience and how they found it was beneficial. How did they engage team members from their organization? Because I think sometimes when we approach people about doing this, there's a lot of uncertainty and whether or not they want to maybe participate. So that could be really helpful to just hear more about the experience from the lens of the participant versus us just saying, hey, this is something that's good and important and that we maybe need you to do. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about guests that I want to have on. I'm not going to name any names specifically because I do have some feelers out there. And so I think what I would actually really love to do in the new year is take a deep dive into the organizational framework and maybe invite a guest on related to each of the core components and kind of talk about how all of this builds into engagement. So talking about competency, talking about safety, talking about belonging, even esteem. So that is kind of one thing I would like to maybe work on some things around. The AI piece, informatics, potentially coming back because this importance of the preceptors came up so many times. And so I think there's some really cool things happening out there around preceptor research and how we can translate that into practice. So, and then of course, some of our collaborative initiatives that we have going on. So, checking in on kind of the SIM Iowa pilot, maybe some of this work we've done with MCIRN to further enhance preceptor development. And so I think, when we're thinking about, we do one of these a month for 12 months. I've got a list probably a mile long of guests that we could do something every single week, but that is maybe for another year and another day. So, we've talked about a lot of great things today. We've talked about past episodes, key takeaways, things that we've learned, maybe what we need to start thinking about into the future. But as you guys sort of reflect on this past year of nurse residency, when we think about workforce development, what's one strategy or approach that you've seen make a big difference this year that you really wish more organizations would adopt in the year ahead?
I would go back to what Amanda chatted about related to belonging and inclusion. I also thought that was a really powerful conversation. I think I wish more leaders would start or continue to prioritize those human skills, those skills that we can learn. The idea that belonging is not fitting in, belonging doesn't require us to change who we are, but requires us to show up and be who we are. I think that's applicable for new nurses, experienced nurses, and those of us that aren't nurses, and those of us in our personal lives too. That idea of normalizing vulnerability and reflection. I know I'm going to try to be more intentional about these things in the upcoming year.
Yeah, I love that, Jess. And I agree too. I think that conversation around belonging, and then I also think just professional identity too, like having the leaders work with residents and maybe ask them about their professional identity. Like, who do you want to be as a nurse? I think is kind of how Nelda worded it in her podcast episode. And I know even that conversation for me was good to reflect on personally. So, but I think too, having that conversation with nurses kind of early on and talking about the different domains that go with that professional identity. And just, I think it's a great reflection tool. And we talk about reflection a lot in the program. So I think it just ties in really nicely with what we're doing already too.
And I think with that, Amanda, that requires us slowing down.
Yeah, for sure
about it, right? Because again, we're workhorses. We're out here. We're taking care of patients. We're showing up to do the things. But for belonging, for inclusion, for this professional identity, we have to really slow down and think about it. And as nurses and as nurse leaders, we're probably not great about doing that. And so that takes a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of my project I did for my master's around how leaders can support new grads. And a lot of the challenges was time. Like they feel like they don't have enough time. Leaders are always, they're going to meetings, they're doing other things. They feel like there's maybe not enough time. So I think maybe to kind of revisiting how can we go about those challenges. And the one that's just coming to my brain right now is like the open door policy that leaders sometimes have. So like, hey, I may not have time to check in with you every day for 10 or 15 minutes, but my door's open. So if you need something, you want to talk, like I'm here and I'm available. So I think it's those little things too that we can do as leaders, just to remind them like, hey, I'm here when you want to talk through anything too.
Well, and I think, that's where some of these topics around evidence-based practice and innovation. So when we think about like our leadership tasks that we're keeping busy with, is there still value in these things? Or are these things that we're doing because it's the way that we've always been done? And maybe we need to look at what we can take away. We're always adding and adding and adding, but is there anything that we can take away? And then also, how can we leverage innovation and technology to take care of some of the busy work so that we can focus on developing those relationships, having those important conversations with our staff?
Okay, I was going to come back to the well-being. I think this was an important point I forgot to mention is that Dr. Church, he said it's not an individual responsibility, it's a system level priority. So I think we need facilities to get to understand that and get on board with that. Because like you said, nurses are taking on so much and then they're just like going to beat themselves up that I'm not doing my well-being. I'm not doing my self-care. It's supposed to be embedded in the organization that they don't have to think about it, that it's just happening. So he gave great examples, daily check-ins, well-being huddles, the concept of well-being leave instead of sick leave. Like we've got to change our whole view of it. And I think we even touched on that with Gen Z. Like they're not going to put up with it anymore. We're talking about mental health. We talk about all these resources and we're going to stand up for ourselves and we deserve this. So I think getting it to be a system level priority.
And that kind of goes back to this idea of like work-life balance. Work-life balance is not really, I know I use that term a lot, but it's not necessarily a thing. Life is a part of work and work is a part of life. And we need that integration and we need kind of that well-being concept, just like you said, Jill, at the systems level and built in. So we don't have to think about it.
I was just going to say what Jill talked about. We didn't really touch upon that evidence-based practice podcast at all, but one of the sticky notes I have on my desk says, why are we doing this? And is this the best way to do it? And I think that sort of ties it all together too, to from an organization perspective. Why are we doing this? Is this the best way?
Right? It goes back to what I said about leaders and like, we're busy. We need to develop these relationships. We're busy with all of these other things. So that's a great question. Why am I doing all of this other stuff? And is it the best use of my time? Or could I be using my time better somewhere else? When we talked about evidence-based practice in that episode, yes, we talked about the research, but we also talked about what's best for the patient and what does expert opinion sort of say on this. And I think that can be translated to the nursing workforce. What's best for the nurse? Right? What does expert opinion say about this? And what does the research say? So it's those three components that really make up evidence-based practice. And so I love that you have that reminder there. I wonder how many times you're like, I want to say this to Nicole as we're doing things, as she's talking to me about what needs to be done. But that I love that you brought that up because that does sort of tie everything together, whether we are talking about things that our guests this year have brought into the conversation as we think about guests that we're going to bring on, as we think about ideas and strategies for organizations to maybe adopt in the new year. I think always asking that question is key. All right, you guys, we have talked about so many great things this episode. It has been a fabulous year. We've had so many amazing guests. I appreciate each of them. I appreciate all of you for this great work that we've put into the program. I also want to take this moment to congratulate all of you on the Edge Runner Award. I know I was the one that got to go to Washington, D.C. and receive the award on stage, but this was really an award for the program. And this program would have never been possible if it wasn't for all of the value that each of you bring each and every day. So I just want to take a minute to recognize you for your work on that and just say that I appreciate you and I look forward to what 2026 has in store. Wait, before you go, I want to make sure you know all about our suite of resources you can use to support your new graduate nurses. This includes our Academy, a coaching program designed for organizations as they prepare for the implementation and ongoing sustainability of a nurse residency program. Work one-on-one with residency program experts to make sure your organization is residency ready. Our Clinician Wellbeing course is an asynchronous online course that aims to enhance the well-being and resiliency of healthcare professionals, equipping them with the necessary psychological capital to navigate challenges inside and outside of work. Supporting Nurses is another asynchronous online course for preceptors, mentors, and coaches to learn the skills they need to support any new hire. Both of these offerings can be used as a standalone professional development opportunity or to augment any nurse residency program. And we can't forget about the program that started it all, the online nurse residency program. This includes a comprehensive curriculum designed to support new graduate nurses applying all the knowledge they learned in school to their practice. We focus on professional skills, personal well-being competencies, and new graduate nurses even get the opportunity to create real change in their own organization. Offered completely online and in a blended format, this program is highly adaptable to all clinical practice settings. You can learn more about all of these programs and more of what we offer using the links in the show notes below.